He didn't just say it, he threw it. The orange pill bottle hit the wall, bounced once, and rolled to my feet. Ethan stood there, chest heaving, face red, voice shaking with anger. "We're not a charity, Dad. Move out!" For a few seconds, I didn't even move. I just stared at the pills scattered across the kitchen floor, the same ones that kept my heart from giving up on me. I'm Harold Bennett, 69 years old. And that moment standing in the home my son once begged me to move into was when I realized I'd raised a stranger. I didn't yell back. I didn't defend myself. I'd learned something in 6 decades of accounting, marriage, and fatherhood. The loudest response isn't always made with words. What Ethan didn't know was that while he was building a company that looked impressive on paper, I'd been quietly building something of my own. Not revenge, not even pride. Something stronger, a reminder that real charity doesn't come from pity. It comes from respect. So I picked up the pills, placed them back in the bottle, and said nothing. Because the next move was mine. And it would be the one lesson my son would never forget. 18 months before that day, I lost my wife, Margaret. She passed on a quiet Tuesday morning in March. Pancreatic cancer, 6 months from diagnosis to goodbye. One moment we were talking about repainting the kitchen. The next, I was sitting alone at the dining table, staring at her empty chair, wondering how a life built over 40 years could collapse in half a year. Ethan flew in for the funeral. Sharp, suit-tired eyes phone never out of his hand. He stayed 3 days, long enough to handle logistics, say all the right words, and book a return flight. Before he left, he looked at me the way people look at something fragile, something they're not sure how to handle. "Dad, why don't you come stay with me for a while? Just until you're back on your feet. I should have known better, but when you lose someone like Margaret, your world gets quiet, too quiet. You start mistaking silence for safety, and any sign of attention feels like love. So I packed a few bags, her old photo album, and that worn leather wallet she gave me in 1987. And I took my son at his word. Ethan's place was a modern palace in Palo Alto, 3 floors of glass polished stone, and smart devices that talked more than people did. It was beautiful, expensive, and cold. The first night there, I couldn't sleep. The house hummed with electricity, but not warmth. Margaret's side of the bed was empty again. The air smelled like disinfectant, not coffee. And even though my son's home had room for 10, I'd never felt smaller. He meant well, or at least I told myself that. He checked in, made sure I had my medication lined up, asked if I wanted anything from Whole Foods. But the tone was formal, like a manager doing his job, not a son talking to his father. That's when I started to feel it, the quiet distance between us. The sense that I was a guest, not family. He'd leave early, come home late, and the moments we did share were filled with polite small talk about markets, valuations, and IPOs. I tried to tell him about Margaret's garden, the one she used to fuss over every Sunday. He nodded, smiled, and looked back at his laptop. Grief has a strange way of reshaping people. It can make you softer or harder. Ethan's version of grief turned into drive. Mine turned into stillness. And in that stillness, I started realizing that I wasn't healing. I was being managed. But I stayed, because that's what parents do. We keep hoping the next meal, the next cup of coffee, the next conversation will feel like family again. Except this time the silence wasn't healing. It was warning me. It started small, like most cracks in a foundation. At first I told myself it was nothing. Maybe just Ethan's way of staying organized, of keeping track of things in that efficient Silicon Valley way of his. But one morning I came into the kitchen and saw something waiting for me on the counter. A grocery receipt, highlighted, circled in red. $37 for my diabetes medication. $42 for groceries I'd picked up myself. Next to the circle in neat handwriting, Ethan had added a note, for tracking purposes. I stared at that piece of paper longer than I should have. Tracking purposes. I wasn't an expense report. I was his father. Still, I said nothing. I reached for my old leather wallet, the one Margaret gave me for our 10th anniversary, the one that had survived every decade of our life together. I counted out exact change and slid it across the counter like a tenant paying rent. Ethan smiled politely, said, "Thanks, Dad," and went back to his emails. That was the first sign. The second came a few weeks later. Ethan was on a video call with investors pacing his glass-walled home office. I passed by to grab my evening pills, trying not to disturb him. Through the door I heard him laugh lightly and say, "Sorry about the noise, my father's staying with us temporarily. He's dealing with some health issues." Health issues, like grief was a medical condition that could be cured with a better dosage. I froze in the hallway pillbox in hand, listening to my own son frame me as a burden to strangers he wanted to impress. He ended the call, walked out, and found me arranging my weekly pills. 7 days, 7 compartments, my quiet routine to stay alive and in control of something. "Dad, we need to talk about boundaries," he said, pulling out one of those ergonomic chairs that probably cost more than my first car. "When I'm in meetings, I need you to stay in your room. These are important people. Important people. As if I weren't one of them anymore." I nodded and told him I understood. But in that moment, something inside me began to fracture. I realized I wasn't living with my son. I was living under his supervision. Then came the third sign, the one I couldn't explain away. Ethan came home early one Thursday morning carrying a thin folder. "Dad," he started, his tone carefully measured. "I think it's time we start thinking about long-term plans." Inside the folder were glossy brochures, each one more polished than the last. Sunset Haven Senior Living, Golden Years Estates, Serenity Meadows. The pages were filled with smiling seniors on golf carts, white fences, manicured lawns. Each one came with a circled number at the bottom. 8,000, 9,000, 12,000 a month. "They have great programs," Ethan said. "Medical staff, on-site social activities. You'd be around people your age." I looked up at him. "I'm not ready for that," I said quietly. He sighed the way busy people do when a conversation interrupts their schedule. "Dad, be realistic. You're 70. You take 7 different medications. What if something happens while I'm traveling?" That word again, realistic. It wasn't realism he wanted. It was convenience. I saw it clearly for the first time. I wasn't part of his home. I was a variable he was trying to manage out of his life. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark listening to the low hum of his smart appliances and thought about Margaret. She would have seen it instantly, the subtle way love turns into obligation, how control disguises itself as concern. I told myself he wasn't cruel, just lost in his own success. But there's a kind of pain that only comes when someone you have raised starts treating you like a problem to solve. I still hoped he'd wake up one day and remember who he was. The boy who used to bring his mother daisies from the yard. The one who cried when our neighbor's cat died. But hope is fragile when respect starts to fade. I didn't say anything. Not yet, but deep down I knew something had shifted. A father can forgive many things. Being forgotten shouldn't be one of them. Every morning after Ethan left for work, the house returned to silence. Not peace, the kind of silence that hums like tension in the air. He'd step into his Tesla at exactly 7:30 a.m. Coffee in hand, Bluetooth in ear, already halfway into his first meeting before the car left the driveway. And once the sound of the engine faded, I'd pour myself a cup of black coffee, walk down the hallway, and close the door to the guest room. That was my real office. It wasn't large, just a simple wooden desk, an old lamp, and the antique mahogany chair Margaret and I bought at an estate sale in 1993. But on that desk sat my world, a beat-up Nokia phone, a laptop I kept tucked under a stack of old magazines, and a blue leather binder filled with the kind of paperwork that would make Wall Street pause. Inside that binder were 847 investment contracts. 6 years of quiet deals, 6 years of patience, 6 years of being underestimated. While my son was building a company, people could see I was building one they couldn't. Most people who looked at me saw an aging man with a cardigan and a pillbox. Ethan saw someone slow, sentimental, maybe even outdated. What he didn't see was the part of me that still woke up at 5 a.m. to read financial reports, analyze earnings calls, and scan startup portfolios like a chessboard. Margaret used to call me the quiet storm. She said I was the kind of man who never needed to raise his voice because the results spoke for me. She was right. The binder told that story better than I ever could. There was my first big move, Stripe Series C roundback, when most people thought digital payments was a passing fad. I put in $50,000. Today, that line in the binder was worth more than $800,000. Then came DoorDash. 40,000 into what people mocked as kids delivering food on bikes. That one grew to over 1 million. And SpaceX, the wild card. 100,000 when everyone called Elon Musk a lunatic. That single investment turned into more than 3 million. Numbers like that have a way of changing how people look at you. But I wasn't ready for people to look. Not yet. There's something powerful about being invisible. When no one expects you to matter, you can move freely, think clearly, and build quietly. While Ethan saw me as a retired accountant with fading relevance, the world knew me by another name, H.J. Holdings. An angel investor who never appeared in photos, who answered calls with a steady voice, and an old Nokia phone, who closed deals that funded the dreams of the next generation. No one connected the dots. Not Forbes, not the venture capital firms, not even my own son. It was ironic, really. Ethan was raising Series C funding for his startup, trying to impress the same circles that already knew my name, just not my face. But I didn't do it for pride. Not even revenge. I did it because Margaret always believed that wealth only means something when it helps people build, not when it helps people boast. And yet there was something satisfying watching my son's world orbit around status while mine quietly shaped the stars above it. I could have told him. I could have stopped the brochures, the receipts, the humiliation with one sentence. Son, you're looking at one of Silicon Valley's most successful investors. But I didn't, because sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. And I was waiting patiently for the right moment. The moment when the truth would not only change how he saw me, but how he saw himself. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday morning, thick and heavy, the kind of paper that whispers money before you even open it. It was forwarded from my old accounting firm addressed to H.J. Holdings, not to Harold Bennett. That small detail made me smile. H.J. Holdings had always been my quiet disguise, the mask behind which I could move unseen through the roaring, ego-driven world of tech. I slit the envelope open with the same letter opener Margaret had used to pay the bills decades ago. Inside was an embossed invitation. We would be honored to welcome you as a VIP angel investor at this year's TechFront conference. I let out a slow breath. TechFront, the same conference where Ethan would be headlining as the keynote speaker, his big moment, the one he'd been rehearsing for weeks, the stage he'd built his entire self-image around. Forbes had called me the ghost-shaping Silicon Valley. They meant it as a compliment. I'd been investing in startups for years without ever showing my face. No interviews, no photos, no LinkedIn page, just results. But now fate or irony had arranged a stage where the ghost and the golden boy would finally meet. I ran my thumb over the embossed gold letters. VIP Angel Investor Section, front row. 20 feet from the stage, exactly where I needed to be. I could already picture it. Ethan standing under the spotlight, polished and confident, delivering his speech about innovation leadership and the future of finance. All while his father, the man he called a burden, sat quietly in the front row listening. I didn't feel anger. I'd felt enough of that in my lifetime. What I felt was calm. The kind of calm that comes before a storm you've been planning for a long time. Margaret used to say, "Never fight a fool's battle. Win with elegance." And that's what this would be, a lesson dressed in dignity. I placed the invitation neatly in my blue leather binder next to the contracts that told the story of my quiet empire. Then I opened my laptop, the one Ethan assumed I barely knew how to use, and checked my inbox. 3 new messages. The first was from Andrei Horowitz inviting H.J. Holdings to co-invest in their latest AI fund, minimum buy-in $5 million. The second from a biotech startup developing new treatments for pancreatic cancer, the same disease that took Margaret. That one caught my breath. I marked it for follow-up. The third was from Rebecca Moreno, CFO, of a company I knew far too well. Dear HJ Holdings, we're excited to announce our upcoming Series C round at TechFront. We'd love to have you on board as a strategic investor. Rebecca didn't know I was Harold Bennett, Ethan's father. She only knew I was the mysterious investor every startup wanted on their side. I leaned back in my chair, the irony settling in. My son's company was reaching out to his father's hidden identity for help without realizing it. I took a sip of coffee and laughed quietly. Life has a way of designing poetic symmetry when you least expect it. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something other than disappointment. I felt anticipation, not for revenge, but for revelation. Because sometimes the best way to remind people of your worth isn't by raising your voice. It's by showing up where they least expect you, owning the moment, and letting the truth speak for itself. I closed my laptop, tucked the invitation into my coat pocket, and whispered to myself, "All right, Margaret. Let's teach our son what real legacy looks like. The game wasn't about money anymore. It never was. It was about respect. And I was ready to reclaim mine with style." Friday nights used to mean something in our family. When Margaret was alive, it was the one night we didn't talk about work or bills. We'd have her meatloaf open a bottle of red and laugh until the dishes went cold. But this Friday was different. Ethan ordered sushi from some high-end place in Palo Alto. $38 for 6 tiny slices of fish on rice. I heated up leftover meatloaf from the night before, the same recipe Margaret used to make. The smell filled the kitchen, soft and familiar, but it didn't belong in his sterile stainless steel house. Ethan sat across from me, scrolling through his phone, between bites his thumbs moving faster than his words. I waited for the right moment to speak. "Ethan," I said quietly, "what if I told you I have assets you don't know about?" He looked up, half amused, half distracted. "Assets? What kind of assets?" "Investments," I said. "Business interests." He laughed, a short, sharp sound that hit harder than shouting ever could. It wasn't cruel, just dismissive, the kind of laugh people give when they think they're humoring someone who's confused. "Dad," he said, setting his chopsticks down, "your pension barely covers your medical bills. Mom's life insurance took care of the funeral. There's no secret fortune. I've seen the numbers." I met his eyes. "You've seen some numbers?" He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I got up and walked to the guest room. When I came back, I was holding my old Nokia phone, the same one he teased me about every time he saw it. "This phone received 4 calls today," I said. "Business calls." He blinked. "Business calls from who?" "People you'd recognize," I said, watching his face. "CEOs, investors, entrepreneurs." Ethan's eyebrows drew together, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. "Dad, are you... Okay, are you sure you're not mixing things up? Grief can play tricks, cause..." He stopped himself, but I knew what he meant. Dementia. delusion, age. The words hung in the air, unspoken but heavy. I'm fine, I said evenly. You don't have to worry about that. He tried to smile. Then explain to me how a retired accountant from Nebraska is suddenly talking to Silicon Valley CEOs. The way he said it, retired accountant from Nebraska, as if it were a limitation, not an identity, told me everything about how he saw me. Maybe your old man is more than you think, I said. Ethan sighed the same way he did when an intern didn't understand his pitch deck. Dad, I'm trying to help you. You need structure a plan. This fantasy isn't healthy. Fantasy, I repeated softly. That's what you think this is. I'm saying, you've been through a lot. Losing Mom, moving in here. It's a lot of change. Maybe you're trying to hold on to something. I nodded slowly. Maybe I am, but not the way you think. He leaned back in his chair, exasperated. I don't understand why you're being defensive. I'm offering you solutions. You can't live like this forever. You need support. I looked at the man across from me, the successful CEO, the son I raised to believe in hard work and empathy. Somewhere along the way, success had replaced empathy with efficiency. You think I'm your problem, I said. That's not fair, he said quickly. I'm trying to make things easier for both of us. For you, I corrected. Not for us. He froze, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't have an answer. The silence between us was sharp, uncomfortable. I could hear the faint buzz of his phone on the counter, the hum of the refrigerator, my own pulse beating in my ears. Finally, I stood up. You're right, I said. He looked relieved. I am. Yes, I said. I should move out. His expression flickered something between guilt and relief before settling into a practiced calm. Dad, that's not what I... Yes, it is, I said gently. You've made your feelings clear, and I've made mine. He opened his mouth to speak, but I stopped him with a raised hand. Don't worry, Ethan. I'll take care of it, my way. Then I picked up my empty plate, rinsed it under the sink, and set it in the dishwasher. He stayed seated watching me, searching for a way to undo the words hanging between us. But it was too late. That was the night I stopped trying to explain myself. The night I decided to stop defending my worth and start proving it. Some storms announce themselves with thunder. Mine started in silence. The next morning, the house felt colder than usual. Maybe it was the weather, or maybe it was the kind of cold that settles after something breaks between two people, and neither knows how to fix it. Ethan left for his Saturday run at 7:15 sharp, the same routine he never missed. University Avenue through Stanford's campus back home in 43 minutes. I knew his habits better than he thought. That meant I had exactly 43 minutes to do something I hadn't done in months. I went to my room, locked the door, and pulled out the blue leather portfolio from my desk drawer. The same one Ethan walked past every day, assuming it was filled with old tax files or pension paperwork. He never asked about it. He never wondered why I guarded it so carefully. Inside were 6 years of my life, 847 pages of investment contracts arranged chronologically, protected in plastic sleeves. Each one told a story Ethan didn't know existed. The first document was dated March 15th, 2018. Stripe. Series C round. $50,000 when they were just a quiet payment processor no one had heard of. That small bet was now worth $800,000. Next came June 3rd, 2018. DoorDash. I invested $40,000 when people laughed at the idea of ordering food from your phone. That $40,000 had grown to $1.2 million. And then the crown jewel. September 21st, 2019. SpaceX. Private placement round. $100,000 when Elon Musk was still being called crazy for wanting to shoot cars into space. That single investment, worth $3.8 million today. I smiled not from greed, but from quiet satisfaction. The kind you feel when time finally proves what you believed all along. While Ethan was raising Series C funding for his startup and talking about innovation, I had quietly built something real, a portfolio that could fund 3 generations. And yet he still looked at me like I was a burden. I ran my fingers over the crisp edges of the documents, the smell of paper and ink mixing with the faint scent of Margaret's perfume that still lingered in the room. She used to say, "Numbers don't lie." She was right. Numbers tell stories. They reveal who was patient when everyone else was impulsive, who believed when everyone else doubted, who built when others only talked. As I turned the final page, my phone buzzed my old Nokia, the one Ethan called ancient technology. 3 new emails. The first was from Andre Horowitz asking if HJ Holdings wanted to join their latest AI fund. Minimum investment $5 million. The second came from a biotech company in South San Francisco. They were developing new treatments for pancreatic cancer, the same disease that took Margaret. They wanted HJ Holdings to lead their next funding round. I bookmarked it immediately. And then came the third email. Subject line, Payflow. Series C funding opportunity. It was from Rebecca Moreno, the CFO of Ethan's company. I stared at it for a long moment, letting the irony sink in. The company my son had built, the same one he said was too important to be distracted by his father, was now reaching out to me, his father, for investment. The universe has a strange sense of humor. I opened the email. It was polite, professional, the kind of message sent to dozens of investors at once. We believe Payflow represents a unique opportunity. We'd love for HJ Holdings to join our round at TechFront Conference. Rebecca had no idea who she was writing to. Ethan had no idea who his father really was. And that was the moment everything crystallized. All the quiet humiliation, the receipts, the brochures, the lectures about being realistic, suddenly didn't sting anymore. Because now I understood something Ethan didn't. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just waits for the right stage. And mine was already being built 20 minutes down the road at the Moscone Center in San Francisco. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. The storm I'd been holding inside was finally ready to break, but not in anger, not in chaos, in precision. Because when life disrespects you loudly, the smartest response is to win quietly. Then let the truth make the noise for you. Sunday afternoon came with sunshine that felt almost artificial, the kind that belongs more to corporate events than family gatherings. Payflow's annual company barbecue was being held at their Palo Alto headquarters, a lawn full of tech employees pretending to relax while networking over sliders and craft beer. I wasn't invited, of course. Ethan had made that clear earlier in the week. "It's really more of a team thing, Dad," he'd said. "You'd be bored." I didn't argue. But that morning I got a call from Linda Walsh, the coordinator from TechFront. She wanted to hand-deliver my VIP conference credentials. Some new security protocol, she said. I told her I'd be at my son's company event and gave her the address. She insisted on stopping by. 2 hours later, I walked into Payflow's backyard, surrounded by clusters of young professionals and startup chatter. The smell of grilled meat and sunscreen filled the air. People were laughing, sipping IPAs, tossing beanbags in a game I never learned the name of. It looked exactly like the kind of fun that gets scheduled on calendars. When Ethan spotted me, the color drained from his face. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Before I could answer, Linda stepped up beside me, holding a small envelope. "Mr. Bennett," she said warmly, "I just wanted to drop this off. And you must be Ethan. I'm Linda Walsh from TechFront. I'm really looking forward to your keynote this Wednesday." Ethan's smile tightened. He nodded automatically, the CEO mask slipping back into place. "Of course. Nice to meet you." Linda turned to me again. "And thank you, Harold, for all your support. TechFront wouldn't be what it is without HJ Holdings. You could feel the air change." Conversations nearby started to slow. People glanced over, curious. Ethan blinked. "HJ Holdings." His tone was careful, like he wasn't sure he'd heard right. Linda looked surprised. "Oh, sorry. I assumed you knew. Harold's firm has been one of our most consistent angel investors for years. He's practically a legend in the startup scene." Ethan froze. "My father runs HJ Holdings." By then, Payflow's CFO, Rebecca Moreno, had walked over a drink in her hand. "Wait, the HJ Holdings, the one Forbes called the silent force behind Silicon Valley's unicorns." Linda nodded. "That's the one." Rebecca's eyes widened as she turned toward me. "Mr. Bennett, are you the Harold behind HJ Holdings?" I smiled just enough to confirm what everyone was already realizing. Around us, the backyard had gone completely silent. 50-some employees and their families, all of them staring at the CEO's father like I'd just stepped out of a magazine article. Ethan's voice was barely a whisper now. "Dad, what's going on?" I looked at him steadily. "Remember when I told you I had assets you didn't know about?" His mouth opened, but no words came out. Rebecca jumped in almost giddy. "You were an early investor in DoorDash, right? And SpaceX. I've studied those deals. They're legendary." I nodded. Series A for DoorDash. Private placement round for SpaceX. That one turned out pretty well. A nervous laugh rippled through the crowd, but it died as quickly as it started. Ethan looked like he was trying to breathe through concrete. Linda checked her watch. "I should go," she said, still smiling. "See you at TechFront, Mr. Bennett. Front row seat, right?" "Wouldn't miss it," I said. As she left, whispers began spreading across the lawn. H.J. Holdings. Wait, that's his dad. He's that guy. I could feel Ethan's composure cracking. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched. Dad, we need to talk privately. But Rebecca was still standing there, clearly piecing everything together. Ethan, she said softly, do you realize your father's firm could fund our next round? We just reached out to H.J. Holdings last week. Ethan turned to her, stunned. You what? We sent a pitch deck, she said. Standard outreach. We had no idea. He looked back at me. You got an email from my company. I nodded. I did. You could have heard a pin drop. All around us, employees who once barely noticed the old man in the corner were staring with wide eyes, watching their CEO realize that the father he'd dismissed as a burden was the man every investor in Silicon Valley wanted to impress. I gave Ethan a small, calm smile. Don't worry, son, I said. I'm still considering it. Rebecca laughed awkwardly, trying to break the tension. Well, I hope you do. We'd be honored. Ethan didn't laugh. His face had gone pale. Linda's voice echoed faintly from the gate as she waved goodbye. See you both at the conference. As the noise of the party slowly returned, I could feel every glance in that backyard still resting on me. The mysterious angel investor, the CEO's father, the man no one saw coming. Ethan leaned close, his voice low. Dad, please, let's go home. I looked around at his employees, at their polite smiles, their curious stares, the sudden shift in energy. For the first time, I wasn't the invisible guest. No, Ethan, I said softly. I think I'll stay for a bit. It's nice to finally meet the people you're so proud of. He didn't argue. He couldn't. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone in that yard felt it. That day I didn't raise my voice, didn't gloat, didn't need to, because sometimes the most powerful thing a father can do is simply show up and let the truth speak for itself. The Monday after the company barbecue, I woke up to an email from Ethan. We need to talk. Urgent. Board meeting at 3 p.m. There was no greeting. No dad, just the message. It read like a summons. By 3 o'clock, I was sitting in a glass-walled conference room overlooking downtown Palo Alto, the kind of space designed to impress investors. Minimalist furniture, exposed brick, the faint smell of cold brew and ambition. Ethan stood at the head of the long table, perfectly composed as his board members filtered in one by one. Most of them were half my age, dressed in black turtlenecks or crisp suits, clutching laptops like shields. When he saw me, Ethan offered a polite nod. Thank you for coming. His tone was professional, distant like a CEO, addressing a stakeholder, not a son speaking to his father. I nodded back, calm. Of course. He waited until everyone had settled before starting. Some of you may have heard certain rumors at the company event this weekend. He began carefully. About H.J. Holdings. About my father. A murmur rippled around the table. Rebecca, his CFO, looked everywhere except at me. Ethan continued. I thought it would be best to clear the air directly, Mr. Bennett. He hesitated for a moment, catching himself before saying, "Dad has agreed to join us today." He gestured toward me, like he was introducing a visiting dignitary. I leaned forward slightly, hands folded. "I appreciate the invitation," I said, "though I suspect I wasn't called here just for introductions." One of the board members, a sharp-looking woman with a Stanford pin on her lapel, glanced between us. "Mr. Bennett, if I may, are you confirming that you are indeed the founder of H.J. Holdings?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, that's me." You could feel the oxygen shift in the room. A few people exchanged stunned looks. The silent investor who'd funded half of Silicon Valley's biggest players was sitting across from them, and he was their CEO's father. Ethan cleared his throat. "Thank you for clarifying. I wanted this meeting to address any potential conflict of interest, given that my company had reached out to H.J. Holdings for funding without knowing the connection. It was a clean corporate statement, polished, sanitized, but behind it I could hear the panic he was trying to hide. I waited until the room was quiet again before speaking. "There's no conflict of interest, Ethan, just a conflict of understanding." He frowned slightly. Meaning, I said evenly. "You've been so busy climbing that you forgot who helped build the ground beneath you." A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Ethan's jaw tightened. "With all due respect, that's not fair. Fairness, I said, isn't the point. Perspective is." I looked around the table, making sure every eye was on me. "You see, success has a way of warping memory. When people start believing they built themselves from nothing, they stop seeing the shoulders they stood on to get there." Ethan's face flushed. "I've worked hard for everything I have." "I know you have," I said softly, "and I'm proud of that. But hard work means very little if it makes you forget where you came from." Silence. The kind that feels like glass about to break. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small cream-colored envelope. Ethan's eyes followed it immediately. "This," I said, placing it on the table, "is what you would have inherited." He blinked. "What is that?" $2 million, I said simply. "It was set aside for you after your mother passed." A few people at the table inhaled sharply. Ethan looked stunned. "You were planning to give me $2 million? Was I corrected gently? Past tense. He looked at me, hurt and angry all at once. "You're cutting me out." "No," I said quietly. "I'm donating it." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. "To the Margaret Bennett Foundation," I continued, "a non-profit supporting pancreatic cancer research. Your mother's name will fund hope instead of entitlement." Ethan stared at me, color draining from his face. "You can't just... I already did," I said. "Last week." Rebecca looked down, visibly shaken. One of the board members whispered something under their breath. I leaned forward slightly. "Ethan's success without humility is just arrogance with better lighting. You've built something impressive, but somewhere along the way you forgot that character isn't measured by valuation." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The words wouldn't come. "I don't need your company's money," I said. "And I don't want your apologies. What I do want is for you to remember who you are. When all this..." I gestured to the sleek office. "The boardroom, the city skyline beyond the glass is gone. Because when life strips it away, All that's left is how you treated people, especially the ones who never stopped believing in you. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air in the room felt heavier than before. Then I stood up. Thank you for your time, everyone. As I turned to leave, I paused by the door and looked back at my son. He looked smaller now, not in stature, but in certainty. I met his eyes. This isn't punishment, Ethan. It's a reminder. Money fades. Integrity doesn't. Learn that lesson now, before the world teaches it the hard way. Then I walked out, leaving him and his board in silence. Behind me, the sound of quiet breathing and shifting chairs filled the room. A moral storm had just passed through, and no one wanted to be the first to speak. That day wasn't about power or revenge. It was about clarity, the kind a man earns only after losing everything except his dignity. The day after the board meeting, the news broke, not through press releases or financial headlines, but through whispers, whispers that carried faster than truth usually does. By noon, everyone in Ethan's company knew. The $2 million that once had his name on it was now part of the Margaret Bennett Foundation, a fund dedicated to pancreatic cancer research. His mother's name would live on, not through inheritance, but through healing. When I made that decision, I didn't do it to humiliate him. I did it because some lessons are too important to wait for life to teach. Money can build comfort, but it can also build walls. It can disguise cruelty as confidence, and selfishness as ambition. I'd watched it happen to my son, to people who once swore success wouldn't change them. And when I saw it taking him, I knew I had to act before it hardened completely. That afternoon, I signed the transfer documents with my attorney, Margaret Chen. Her hand trembled slightly as she passed me the final sheet. "Are you certain about this?" "Harold?" she asked. "I've never been more certain," I said. "This money was meant to do good. Now it finally will." When the press caught wind of it, the story exploded. Headlines read, "FinTech CEO's father donates $2 million in his late wife's name," and HJ Holdings founder rejects nepotism funds cancer research. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years I'd hidden behind that quiet little name, HJ Holdings, investing silently, never chasing recognition. But this time the spotlight wasn't on wealth. It was on meaning. Ethan called that evening. I could hear the strain in his voice, the exhaustion behind every word. "Dad, why would you do that?" "Because you needed to see," I said. "You needed to understand that money doesn't define worth. It never did. You have a company. I have a legacy. But what matters most isn't who builds more. It's who builds better." There was a long pause. I could almost hear him breathing through the realization. "I thought I was helping you," he finally said, "by keeping you out of my business. I thought success would make you proud." "I was proud," I replied, "until you started measuring pride in dollars." Silence again. But this time it wasn't defensive. It was heavy with reflection. Later that night, I sat by the window looking out at the city lights flickering like restless ideas. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace. Not the kind that comes from winning, but the kind that comes from doing what's right, even when it hurts. That donation wasn't revenge. It was restoration. A balance between what was lost and what could still be saved. Because the truth is simple, even if we pretend not to see it. Money can't buy dignity. It can't rewrite regret. But it can fund redemption if you choose to let it. And that's what the Margaret Bennett Foundation was meant to be. Not just a tribute to the woman who taught me love and patience, but a reminder to the man who'd forgotten both. By the end of the week, checks began arriving, donations from strangers, colleagues, even a few of Ethan's own investors. The story had struck a chord. People wanted to believe that wealth could serve something purer than ego. And maybe that was the real lesson. That, in a world obsessed with status, sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is to give it all away. Wednesday morning arrived grey and heavy, the kind of sky that made even Silicon Valley look humble. The Moscone Center was buzzing, 2,000 founders, investors, journalists, all waiting for the next big idea that would change the world. I arrived early, wearing the same navy suit Margaret always said made me look distinguished, not old. At check-in, a young volunteer scanned my badge and smiled politely. "Welcome, Mr. Bennett. Front row center. You're with the angel investor tier." I thanked her, found my seat, and looked around. The faces in that room could move billions with a single email. Yet for all their power, none of them knew the story that was about to unfold. By 10:30, the hall dimmed. TechFront's host Linda Walsh stepped on stage, her voice confident, her rhythm perfect. "Our next speaker needs no introduction," she said. Ethan Bennett, CEO of Payflow, one of FinTech's fastest-growing startups. Applause, cameras lifted. My son walked out under the lights in his $1,000 suit, smiling like the world finally made sense again. He looked sharp, proud, untouchable. He began his keynote with practiced energy slides about growth charts, AI-driven cash flow systems, international expansion plans. The crowd nodded, impressed. He was good. I'd taught him that how to sound certain even when you're terrified. Then halfway through, phones across the audience started buzzing. At first it was a few, then a dozen, then hundreds. People glanced at screens, whispering. I saw the confusion ripple across Ethan's face. On the giant screen behind him, a headline flashed from TechFront's live feed. "The mystery of HJ Holdings solved. It's Harold Bennett, father of Payflow's CEO." The timing couldn't have been more precise. The article was detailed, full of photos from the barbecue, my portfolio, my investments, even a quote from me about integrity over wealth. Ethan froze. He tried to continue, but the audience's attention had shifted. The room was alive with murmurs. Every eye turned toward me. Linda Walsh reappeared from the wing's microphone in hand, her voice cutting through the tension. "Well," she said with a grin, since the man of the hour happens to be here, "maybe we can hear from him directly." Ethan's composure cracked. "Dad," he said into the mic. "Please." But it was too late. People were already clapping, encouraging me to stand. I rose slowly. The lights caught my face. For a moment, everything was still. I walked toward the stage, each step heavier than the last, but certain. When I reached the podium, Linda handed me a microphone. I looked out over the sea of faces, some curious, some admiring, some simply stunned. "I didn't come here to steal anyone's spotlight," I began, my voice steady. "But since my name is already up there, maybe it's time I tell you what this is really about." Ethan stood a few feet away, motionless. "I am H.J. Holdings," I said. "And yes, I've made money more than I ever dreamed. But this story isn't about success. It's about misunderstanding what success truly means." The audience leaned in. "Yesterday, I donated $2 million money meant for my son to a cancer research foundation in my late wife's name. Not to shame him, not to make headlines, but to remind him, and maybe some of you, that money without morality is just noise." A hush fell over the room. Cameras clicked. I gave away my son's inheritance. I continued to teach him what it means to build something worth inheriting. Because success isn't measured by how high you climb. It's measured by how you treat the people who gave you the ladder. Ethan's jaw tightened, but his eyes softened. "My son is brilliant," I said. "He's built something extraordinary. But sometimes brilliance blinds us to the simple truth that character is the only currency that never loses value." The room was silent. I handed the microphone back to Linda, turned toward Ethan, and added quietly but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I didn't take anything from you, son. I just redirected it to where it could do more good. That's what real success looks like." Then I stepped down from the stage. For a long heartbeat, no one moved. Then from somewhere in the crowd, someone started clapping. Slow, steady, sincere. Within seconds, the entire hall was on its feet. A standing ovation. Not for wealth, not for power, but for truth. I glanced back once before leaving. Ethan was still on stage, surrounded by applause he hadn't earned that day, but needed to hear. For the first time, he looked not like a CEO, but like my son again. As I walked out into the cold San Francisco air, I felt lighter than I had in years. It wasn't victory. It was release. Because in a world that worships success, the only real triumph is remembering what it means to be human. By the next morning, the story had taken on a life of its own. What began as a moment on stage had turned into a national conversation. Hashtags spread like wildfire. H.J. Holdings' dad was trending across the country on Twitter. LinkedIn, even morning talk shows. Clips of my short speech were everywhere. Some people called it poetic justice. Others called it a masterclass in humility. A few simply wrote, "That's the kind of father we all wish we had." I didn't read the comments for long. Fame was never the goal, and attention fades faster than truth. But I'll admit, seeing that wave of support made me believe something I hadn't felt in years, that maybe integrity still mattered. Meanwhile, Payflow, Ethan's company, found itself in the eye of the storm. Investors weren't pulling out, but they were asking questions. The kind that cut deeper than numbers. Does your leadership align with your values? Can we trust a CEO who forgets the human side of success? The irony wasn't lost on me. The same people who once saw Ethan as a symbol of innovation were now dissecting his character. That was never what I wanted. I didn't need to destroy him. I just needed him to remember. Still, even in the chaos, something remarkable happened. My inbox flooded not with gossip, but with partnership requests. Major funds, global investors, people I'd never met were now calling HJ Holdings a moral compass in modern business. One firm even offered to co-found a mentorship program for young founders focused on ethical leadership in tech. It was surreal. 6 years of quiet investing had never drawn this much attention. But all it took was one act of conviction to change the way people saw me, and maybe the way they saw themselves. I thought about Margaret. She'd have smiled at the irony. She used to say, "Real power isn't loud, Harold. It's consistent." She was right. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about Ethan or me. It was about every person who's ever been dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated because they chose decency over ego. My story had become theirs. Later that week, I met with one of the fund directors who wanted to partner. He leaned forward across the table and said, "You've proven something rare, Mr. Bennett, that a man can win without stepping on anyone." I smiled. "That's not winning," I said. "That's just living right." At home, the phone rang again. "Ethan." His voice was quieter this time, his words slower. "Dad." He said, "The world thinks I lost everything this week. But I think I just started learning what really matters." That was enough for me. The media could keep their headlines. The market could keep its hype. I had what I needed, a son, rediscovering his compass, and a legacy that finally stood for something worth passing on. Sometimes victory doesn't come from beating others. It comes from outlasting what's false, until the truth stands alone. And when that truth finally stands, it doesn't roar. It simply breathes. Because in the end, the quiet win, the one built on character, echoes the longest. That night, the house was silent in a way that pressed against the walls. The headlines had quieted. The applause had faded. And what remained was the kind of stillness that forces people to face themselves. Ethan knocked softly on my door. His voice was almost a whisper. "Dad, can we talk?" I put down the book I'd been pretending to read, Margaret's old copy of Pride and Prejudice, the same one she always left open to the page where Elizabeth finally tells the truth to Darcy. I'd read that scene 100 times, but tonight it felt different. Ethan stepped in, holding 2 cups of coffee. No suits, no armor, just a son, stripped of pretense. He sat on the edge of the bed and handed me a cup. "Black, no sugar." He remembered. We sat there for a while, not saying much. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was necessary. Finally, he spoke. His voice was tight but honest. "I've been thinking about what you said. About money. About what I became." He hesitated. "I didn't want you gone because it was better for you. I wanted it because it was easier for me." I looked at him, letting the words settle. That sentence, simple, raw, was more valuable than any apology he could have rehearsed. He exhaled. "You were right, Dad. I built everything trying to prove I didn't need anyone, especially you. But all I did was build a cage out of my own ambition." I nodded slowly. "Ethan, we all build cages at some point. The difference is whether we realize we're the ones holding the key." He rubbed his face the way he used to when he was a boy who'd done something wrong but didn't want to cry. "I thought success meant independence," he said. "But it turns out it just means nothing if you lose yourself along the way." I reached over, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's not too late to change course," I said. "You just have to decide what kind of man you want to be from here on out." He looked up, eyes glistening, not from shame, but from recognition. "The kind Mom would have been proud of," he whispered. That broke me a little, not because it hurt, but because it healed something I thought was gone forever. "Then start there," I told him. "And remember, success isn't what you build. It's who you become while building it." We sat there for a long while after that, the world outside, completely still. The storm had passed, but its lesson remained. In that quiet moment, I didn't see a CEO or a disappointed father. I saw two men flawed, stubborn, learning in real time how to love again. That night wasn't about guilt or forgiveness. It was about clarity. Sometimes life doesn't scream its lessons. It whispers them in the silence after pride has fallen. And when you finally listen, really listen, you realize that redemption doesn't come with grand gestures or applause. It comes with honesty spoken softly over 2 cups of black coffee in the middle of the night. 2 weeks after that long night, something shifted. The world outside hadn't changed much, but inside our home, the air felt lighter. There was less pride in Ethan's voice, less defensiveness in his eyes. The silence between us no longer felt like distance. It felt like space to rebuild. One morning, I walked into the kitchen and found him sitting there, laptop open, coffee untouched. He looked up as I entered. "Dad," he said, his tone calm but deliberate. "I called Janet Morrison this morning." It took me a second to remember who she was, the consultant he'd hired to find me an assisted living facility. I cancelled everything he said. The tours, the deposits, the brochures, all of it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of the refrigerator filled the pause, a small but steady reminder that life goes on, even when words fail. "Good," I said finally. "That's a start." Ethan nodded, then exhaled deeply like someone releasing a weight they didn't realize they'd been carrying. "There's something else," he continued. "I talked to my team yesterday. About you. About the conference." He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I told them I was wrong." I raised an eyebrow. "Wrong about what?" "About what leadership means," he said. "About what it means to respect the people who built you, not just the ones who work for you." I told them I'd lost sight of that. And I apologized. I watched him carefully. This wasn't a performance. His voice carried no bravado, just truth. The kind that only comes after you've been stripped of excuses. He leaned forward, his tone soft, but sure. "I want to ask you something, Dad, not as a son, but as a professional. Would you consider joining Payflow? Not as a figurehead, but as a strategic advisor. We could use your judgment, your perspective." I could use it. I took a slow sip of my coffee, hiding a small smile behind the rim of the mug. "So now you want the old accountant from Nebraska to sit at the big table?" He chuckled, embarrassed but sincere. "I want the man who taught me what real value means." For a long moment I said nothing. Then I nodded. "All right, but let's make one thing clear. I'm not doing this for appearances. I'm doing it because you're finally ready to listen." He nodded quickly. "I understand. And Ethan," I added, my voice steady but firm, "if you ever treat me or anyone else with that same arrogance again, I won't just donate your inheritance. I'll donate my entire fortune, all 12.5 million of it." His eyes widened, then softened. "You'd really do that?" Without hesitation, I said. "Because money can't build character, but it can remind you of what you stand to lose when you forget it." He looked down, then laughed quietly. "Mom would have loved this," he said. "She always said you'd find a way to make a lesson out of everything." "She was usually right," I replied. In the weeks that followed, our dynamic began to change. He'd stop by my new office at Payflow, just a modest corner room with a window overlooking the city, and ask for advice on partnerships operations, even company culture. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. For the first time in years, we worked side by side, not as father and son locked in competition, but as two men building something together. We still disagreed sometimes. Old habits don't vanish overnight. But there was a line of respect drawn now unspoken yet solid. He knew where it came from, and I knew he'd earned the chance to keep it. Redemption doesn't arrive with grand gestures. It shows up quietly in cancelled contracts, in honest apologies, in the courage to start over without pretending you never fell. That's what Ethan was learning. And truth be told, I was learning it too, because forgiveness, like success, only means something when it's shared. A few weeks later, life found its rhythm again, not the one defined by business or status, but something quieter, steadier. The noise around the conference had faded, and the headlines moved on as they always do. But beneath the calm, something new had taken root. Each morning, I'd sit by my office window, a cup of coffee in one hand, the glow of my laptop lighting the other. My inbox, once filled with investment proposals, now carried a different kind of opportunity, one that blended profit with purpose. That morning, 2 emails stood out. The first came from a clean energy startup in Colorado, a small team with a big vision. They weren't just chasing growth. They wanted to solve a problem that actually mattered. Their proposal wasn't the flashiest, but it carried integrity, and that I'd learned was the rarest currency of all. The second email came from the Margaret Bennett Foundation, the organization that had become both my compass and my confession. The board wanted to meet to discuss a new scholarship program for students who had lost a parent to cancer. Young people who, like Ethan, once needed someone to believe in them. I smiled as I read it. Margaret would have loved that idea. She always believed education was the truest form of inheritance. So I picked up the phone and called the foundation. "Let's make it happen," I said. "Let's give these kids a chance to build something that lasts longer than money." When I hung up, I realized something simple but profound. I was still investing, just in different kinds of returns. The market might measure success in dollars, but legacy measures it in impact. I opened a new spreadsheet dividing my upcoming investments into 2 columns, one for startups, one for causes. Profit and purpose side by side. That balance felt right. It felt human. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the door. Ethan stood there, casual but confident, a folder under his arm. "Board meeting in 10, he said with a grin. "You ready, old man?" I laughed. "I've been ready longer than you've been alive." He shook his head, smiling as he left. And for a moment, I just sat there watching him walk away, not with pride or relief, but with peace. That's the thing about legacy. It isn't about what you leave behind. It's about what you pass forward while you're still here. It's not about the zeros in your bank account, but the lives that keep counting because of what you did. Sometimes giving away what you thought you couldn't live without is the only way to hold on to what really matters. So if you've ever been underestimated by your own family, if someone once made you feel small, like your worth depended on what you had, instead of who you are, tell me your story in the comments below. Because maybe, just maybe, your story is the next one someone needs to hear to remember what real value looks like.